Hi there. I'm Tom Field. I'm Senior Vice President of Editorial with ISMG. I'm delighted to welcome you to our session today, which is about the channels your DLP can't see. Joining me on our virtual stage is John Paste, Sales Engineer with Safetica. But before I bring him onto our stage, let me give you some background. Modern data loss is no longer driven primarily by malicious insiders or sophisticated attacks. According to Safetica's latest data protection trends research, sensitive data increasingly moves through everyday workflows. AI tools, cloud collaboration, instant messaging, screenshots, removable media, routine employee behavior. Based on hundreds of thousands of blocked activities and insider risk signals gathered and analyzed by Safetica's data analysts across this broad range of global industries, this session today is going to break down the 6 major trends that are reshaping how organizations need to think about data protection in 2026. You'll learn why traditional document-centric controls are struggling to keep pace with modern work habits, how risk is shifting toward harder to monitor communication channels, and what security teams can do to reduce exposure without disrupting productivity. A bit about my organization. ISMG is a global education and intelligence firm based in the U.S. in Princeton, New Jersey, and you may know us by any number of our 38 media properties. They include Bank Info Security, Data Breach Today, AIToday.io. In all, we serve an audience of over 2 million security and technology leaders globally, and we give them a daily diet of news, analysis, research, and educational programs just like this one. Just a few notes of housekeeping. If you have any questions for our presenter today, submit them anytime by the chat window on your screen. If you encounter any technical issues with today's webinar, take down the email address. If you write to webinars@ismg.io, we've got support staff standing by to help. And a reminder, today's webinar is copyrighted material meant for today's session and individual study purposes only. If you'd like to use any of the information presented today, please contact us. Let's meet our sponsor. Safetica is a global leader in intelligent data security. Their AI-powered platform unifies data protection, insider risk management, compliance readiness, and data discovery across on-premises and cloud environments. With smooth integration and minimal disruption to business workflows, Safetica safeguards sensitive data, reduces insider risk, and ensures regulatory compliance for businesses in more than 120 countries. Now let's meet John Paste. He's a technology sales professional with more than 8 years of experience in cybersecurity and enterprise software. As sales engineer at Safetica, he helps organizations protect sensitive data and manage insider risk through AI-powered data loss prevention solutions. And with that, let's welcome to the virtual stage, John Paste. John, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation today.
Hey, Tom, thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Good to be here.
So let's start here. When we talk about the channels that DLP can't see, what are the ones that concern you the most?
I mean, I would say it's mostly just these kind of everyday activities. It's going to be people, maybe printing things, copying and pasting things, could be email traffic, could be many different things realistically. And some of these things, DLP does have coverage. DLP does have the ability to view certain things at least. But, realistically, at the end of the day, what we see and what we find more often than not is it is just kind of your relatively boring day-to-day activities where most of the, let's say, maybe interesting things or exciting things actually happen in the kind of data security world where, data does go somewhere it shouldn't when people are just doing their job. Maybe they do something just a little bit incorrectly, and then that's kind of how things can kind of snowball from there.
Well, you make a good point because your research even shows that most data loss isn't malicious. But how does that change how security teams should be thinking about this problem? Because they may be looking for malicious activity.
Exactly. And a big portion of that is going to be in relation to kind of your insider risk or how you can define that or look into it. A lot of times with historical data loss prevention tools, it is going to be purely just, some policy tied to some classification, and that's really all that it is. Where in a more modern approach, you do need to have some sort of insider risk metrics alongside that to make your kind of correct evaluations in terms of, is this actually something that's malicious? Or is it something that's just kind of, maybe it's a seemingly normal activity and somebody just put in the wrong email address or have the wrong attachment in an email or, something just a little bit silly that, that could actually end up triggering something that maybe looks like it's bad, but in reality, it's just somebody messing up. But these sort of things are also the ways that data can get out. So it is very important to, watch and cover these sort of areas as well.
Well, when you think about the enterprise today, they've got ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, AI tool usage is just surging in their blocked activity data.
Oh, yeah.
What is actually going out the door?
I mean, funny enough, this is a really interesting topic, and it's relatively new, not super new, but what we see, of course, most people are going to be using something like a ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, Copilot, kind of your usual suspects. And with things like, for Copilot, that's going to be primarily your business usage, whether it's somebody using it inside of an application or, what have you. That's going to be relatively mundane. Generally, nothing too crazy is going into Copilot, but the more interesting ones are going to be your ChatGPT, your Claude, things like this, where people might be bringing their own, personal accounts into the organization, and a lot do, to be completely frank. And you'll see this when, for example, a lot of organizations are using Claude for the like a desktop environment or something. So you can use Copilot or no, sorry, not Copilot, when you can use Cowork and these sort of things with Claude. If you see somebody maybe using it in the browser or using ChatGPT or something like this in the browser, that's going to be a high indication that somebody's probably using their personal accounts. And the monitoring of what is being, put into these sort of things is just so important because once it goes into that AI tool, it kind of goes into a black box and you really don't know what happened with it or what's going on with it from that point. Whether it's also a personal account or it could even be a business account. There are sneaky ways of doing things with business accounts as well. But yeah, I mean, the world of AI and kind of how people are putting data into AI is ever evolving. And I mean, yeah, we'll see what happens, but we're not going to know now. We're going to know in the future. So very, very interesting topic.
John, I always remember what a CISO told me a few months ago. We tried blocking AI at the door and it came in the windows.
Yeah, that
When you
sounds about right.
but when you block a channel, employees find another one. It could be windows, it could be
Exactly.
holes on the floor, it could be through the basement. How do
Yep.
you stay ahead of that adaptation? Because as you know, where there's a will,
Oh yeah, there's going to be a way. I mean, you just have to really monitor what is going on in an organization. And again, like going back to maybe some, let's say, historical or traditional DLP tools and things like that, it is going to be purely just looking for kind of where's the data going and so on and so forth. But if there's no quote unquote interesting data or classified data going anywhere, it's not going to be capturing it, which again comes back to the whole insider risk topic where it's so important to have the information on what are people doing on their machines, whether that be looking and having some visibility or data on what applications are being utilized, what websites are being utilized, and so on and so forth. By starting to pull some of this data and analyze this data, this is how we can at least not to say get ahead of per se. Of course, you can get ahead in certain times, but more often than not, it's just trying to keep pace with what people are doing and the new things they are trying to, let's say, attempt to do to get around certain restrictions. But having that visibility of that data in real time is crucial. Not having it, a week later, a month later, or whatever it might be, pulling that report after a while to then go back and review it. No, it's looking at that data in real time or as, real time as possible, realistically, to review what is going on, who is doing what, and being able to then put in the, correct policies or actions to deal with whatever may be occurring in the environment.
John, I note that USB usage jumped nearly 8 points in your data. Why that
Yeah.
resurgence now?
That's a very good question. We don't necessarily have a specific instance as to why USB is coming up so much more than it was. One interesting thing, though, that we've also noticed in terms of maybe unusual activities, USB is definitely one of them. You wouldn't think as so much nowadays that USB is being used as much as it is, but I think it could be a few different reasons. Could be maybe there's more advanced filters for the other ways that people are trying to send out information, like via email or file sharing sites or just via the web or whatever it might be. There could be, new ways that folks are implementing solutions to ensure that the data is not going out that way. And people are falling back to maybe a more traditional method of doing this with USBs. Maybe companies are not monitoring USBs. And actually, a lot of times when we do speak with organizations, one of the things they are looking to do is monitor USBs. And it's kind of interesting to think that, so like up until this point, in 2026, we have not been monitoring USBs, which just for me, it seems a bit funny. But at the end of the day, it's kind of reasonable. You wouldn't really think necessarily that, oh, this is my employees are going to be taking data out from USB drives all day, every day. But it definitely can happen. And going back to the AI side of things, we're also seeing a resurgence in like text files or like markdown files and things along these lines because this is what is being created from these AI tools. And again, a lot of that can have sensitive information. And, people think, oh, my PDFs are sensitive or my, I don't know, Word docs or Excel sheets or these sort of things. These are sensitive. But now with the AI tools being able to pull and kind of scrape all this data from the various sources that house that kind of data, it could basically, or well, it can grab that data, putting it into a markdown file, and you can, potentially share that how you wish if you don't have anything really looking for that kind of data. So it's very interesting to see how this is all evolving and changing because we're kind of going maybe a little bit backwards in terms of seeing the USB, coming up in markdown and text files and these sort of things coming back into kind of a resurgence. And also, again, on this similar topic, the creation of new files and these sort of things also on the endpoint, given the past, let's say, 5, 10, 15 years, things are more so done in the cloud than done on-prem. And when I say on-prem, I mean like a desktop, laptop, what have you. But again, now with the usage of AI and especially for work, these AI tools are creating so much documentation. Whether it's, oh, create me a PDF overview of this, that, or the other, create me a Word doc of so on and so forth. This is standard use cases that I know we do for various things, and I know many other organizations do as well. They need to create documentation on something they already have existing, maybe needs to be translated or whatever it might be. But all of this is happening on the endpoint again. So we're having so much data again kind of showing up, not out of nowhere, but definitely in an unexpected manner that wasn't necessarily thought of that, oh, AI is going to do this thing. But now we're seeing so much more data showing up on the endpoint again because of AI. I know we keep going back to AI, but as we all know, it's quite the topic nowadays, and I'm thinking it will be for the foreseeable future.
Well, you got me thinking about screenshots and images. They aren't documents necessarily, but they're ubiquitous, and traditional DLP tends to miss them.
Yes,
It's the right approach.
exactly. Well, I mean, with that, the big thing is optical character recognition or OCR. So yeah, again, exactly. With screenshots or images and these sort of things, that can house a lot of sensitive information depending on what is being captured at that point in time. Similarly, it can also be if you're sharing your screen on some sort of a meeting or what have you. And when you are doing this, you very well, maybe you're sharing the wrong screen or you just have the wrong information up when you start sharing your screen. We've seen it happen before on meetings where all of a sudden we look at something and it's not what somebody's intending to share, but there it is anyways. And you may see it for a split second. Maybe it'll be up there for longer because somebody doesn't realize, but that also could be data leaking. And again, that's why it's important to have some sort of solutions that either have the ability to kind of redact the information that is being, shared in terms of, a screen sharing incident or something like that, or if somebody is screenshotting something, also for maybe that specific information again to be redacted when there is that screenshot taken. And if nothing else, if the screenshot is taken, for it to at least have the ability to, scan that screenshot, look for what might be within it. Generally, again, that's going to be looking for keywords or regular expressions, utilizing optical character recognition to then understand, does that file, does that picture contain anything sensitive? And if so, then at least firstly, would know, we could track it, we could see where it's moving, who's touching it, who's doing whatever they might be doing with it. And of course, as well, if we do have policies built in, you can then also restrict that sort of information from moving around. But if nothing else, you would at least have the visibility, and there's many different things you can do to layer on top of that to make it even, that much more secure.
John, your data shows that 72% of threat level warnings still trace back to email. So my
Hmm.
question, is email actually the channel that we've solved, or is the one we just think we've solved?
I would say it's the one we think we've solved. I mean, more often than not, email is going to be a relatively easy, let's say, thing to control, just because, it's been around for a long time. It's the same difference as USBs. The technology hasn't really changed, and it's probably not really going to change that much going forward. Sure, there could be other methods of maybe transmitting information, and like, let's say, instant messaging applications could be, maybe the new alternative to email. And I know in many other regions around the world, that is the way that they like to communicate, which is why we also see instant messaging showing up in our data here as well. But with email, it's just the most common, I would say, method of people trying to share information. It's generally the easiest when you are trying to share a PowerPoint deck or a spreadsheet or whatever it might be. And, some people will use the inbuilt sharing functions within Microsoft or Google or whatever it might be. But, more often than not, it's easier just to download that attachment or download that file, put it into an email as an attachment, and then just send it out to whomever it's going to be. But again, this is a very traditional way of doing things. It's probably not going to change. It's just the way that it is, and it's the way that people share information. And again, whether it's just plain text in an email, as just writing an email back and forth to somebody, could be maybe copying and pasting sensitive content into said email. And then hopefully you do have some sort of email inspection tool, which again, data loss prevention and as well as Safetica can help you with these sort of things. But also images inside of emails. I know a lot of times a lot of people have problems with signatures getting captured, and it thinks it's something that it's not. These sort of things, we hear this from folks we talk with saying, I'm using this, that, or the other, and I'm having problems with this currently. But it's just the way that it is. But email, it's going to be here, not going anywhere for a while, and I still think it's going to be probably the most commonly used path of just moving kind of information around, at least especially outside of an organization.
Well, you mentioned instant messaging. It showed up high in your blocked activity data. What
Yep.
makes that channel so difficult to govern?
Well, I would say with instant messaging, it's going to be the pure just breadth of all the different options that are available out there. When it comes to, well, it depends on how you do it, right? So with instant messaging, if you're dealing with it via the browser, generally speaking, that is relatively easy because, if somebody's trying to exfiltrate some sort of information via instant messaging, it's gonna be, probably, well, it will be through some sort of a web interface. And that's going to be no different than somebody uploading some sort of data to some sort of a free mail service or a file sharing site or whatever it might be. And as long as the solution has some sort of integration with the browser, you're going to be fine. Or if it has an extension into the browser, you'll be able to read the content. You'll be able to ensure that, data is not being uploaded where it shouldn't be uploaded. The problem that I think occurs most with a lot of folks is going to be the desktop application version of these instant messaging services. And especially because there's just so many, being able to, keep up with any and all of the instant messaging platforms that are out there, it's nearly impossible. It's very the same difference with AI. If you're trying to make something specific for every unique AI tool, platform, whatever you want to call it, it's nearly impossible. Things are just popping up all over the place all the time. So the key is to control that subset of what can actually be utilized. For example, within the Safetica tool, not only is it doing the DLP and the IRM side of things, but it is also working with and managing kind of the usage of applications and also the usage of websites, where we could create some sort of rules to say, block instant messaging applications, but we could put something above that rule, which says maybe allow WhatsApp or allow Teams or whatever is okay to use for the company, or Slack or what have you. So you could whitelist certain things and then make sure that nothing else can run. That's probably the most secure way, I would say, to deal with these sort of things. But yeah, it's tricky. There's not a super easy answer to kind of how to solve that. But yeah, definitely an interesting topic.
Yeah, I understand Gartner's calling for DLP to evolve toward intent detection. What
Yep.
would that look like in practice?
Yeah, I mean, again, that kind of falls back to the insider risk aspect of things, where we need to understand what are individuals looking to do necessarily with that information. Looking at just the action itself is not necessarily enough. We need to look at more so what are people doing maybe before they're doing a, action or something like this, which this is where the kind of also putting AI to work for, these kind of products for data loss prevention tools or insider risk monitoring and management tools is so important, because if you are utilizing a tool that is kind of mapping the behavior of a certain individual, from the laptop desktop point of view, where they spend 99% of their time, work time at least, it can really help paint the picture of what is normal and what is abnormal for certain actions. For example, if you've got somebody in finance or whatever it might be, and they're sending some, I don't know, tax documents or whatever it might be to some external agency that the company works with, they do that on a regularly normal basis. That's going to be, nothing super risky. Sure, it could be sensitive data that is being sent out, but again, it's a reoccurring activity. It is something normal for this unique individual to do, right? But for example, if you've got even, somebody else in the same department that, I don't know, maybe they're off, this one individual is off sick, or the other one is, I don't know, out on vacation or something, and then somebody else does this action, again, that's going to get flagged as something off, odd, bad, what have you. Because again, you've never seen anybody do this kind of action. And that's where also kind of the intent comes into play. We've never seen somebody do this. And again, maybe their intent is not 100% bad or anything like that. They're just doing a new action. But these are the kind of things that can help us stay ahead of these kind of actions, to be able to understand what is normal versus abnormal for certain individuals in an organization. Yeah, it helps immensely with a lot of different things, but DLP as a whole is going to have to evolve with the intent side of things to be able to keep up, because data is being transferred and shared and what have you on a greater scale, I think, now than really ever before.
Okay, this brings us to the CISO's dilemma.
Mm.
How do you reduce exposure in these channels without grinding productivity to a halt?
Yeah. I mean, with that, it's going to be essentially figuring out what, yeah, well, you have to map out what do you use as an organization kind of on a day-to-day basis. I think that's going to be probably one of the most important things that you have to do, is understand, okay, so our company, we use, Outlook, Teams, Edge, let's say our Microsoft shop. And those are going to be probably the most actively or commonly used applications on the machines. Then we'll, have Word and PowerPoint and, Adobe Acrobat maybe, and so on and so forth. So we could whitelist certain applications and these sort of things to ensure that if people are working with these, fine, we'll let them continue to do so. Same difference for maybe email domains, and then going back to also email traffic and these sort of things. We want to make sure that people can, email inside the company and so on and so forth. So we can maybe whitelist the company email domain. Or if you want to get really specific, you could also break it down into different departments in the company, and we'll say, okay, so here's the HR team. We can list out the HR team email addresses, again, to ensure that HR can send things to HR, but not outside of HR, and so on and so forth. But it really comes down to, I mean, it can be tedious work, but it is the, going in and reviewing your environment, understanding what are the things that we need to do on a daily basis. Of course, there's always going to be your outlying activities that you need to, factor in whenever it comes across. And, there's going to be a ticket to IT at one point or another. Oh, I need to do this or that. But that's just a part of how it's going to work. You're not going to have something that's going to automate absolutely anything and everything 100% of the time. There is going to be some times where you're going to need to send that ticket to IT to help them unblock something, or, working with a new vendor, need to whitelist this, or so on and so forth. But it's really just understanding what you have as an organization, the ability to then whitelist these things to ensure that data can flow to these areas so that you're not hampering the business. And really, that's the key, really. It is an ever evolving thing, but still, that having that understanding is very crucial. And having the visibility to begin with is what you need to then be able to build out this sort of logic.
John, you talked about insider threat a couple of times, and most organizations do think of insider risk as the disgruntled employee walking out with data. But we know that there are people that are taken advantage of or accidental insiders, people just trying to get their jobs done. What does it actually look like in the wild to you?
Yeah. I mean, in the wild, more often than not, in terms of, insider risks and these sort of things, or the perceived insider risk. I mean, a lot of times it's the vast majority is people just doing things that, they think is correct. It's not malicious. It's just somebody, trying to do their work. But in terms of the, disgruntled employees or something like that, it is actually a relatively small percentage of, the sort of, things that we see in terms of, data leaking in an organization or whatever it might be, or attempted leakage. It's going to be those folks, maybe they put in a 2 week notice or something, and they're going to a competitor and they want to take data. That's a very common thing that we hear, that has happened in organizations where, this is why they're looking for something like Safetica. But in terms of anything that's actually going to be malicious, it is more often than not employees that are, have their 2 weeks notice and are going to be going somewhere else, and they want to take data with them. It's not necessarily to, take down the company or something like this. It's generally for their own personal gain. But still, these are things that, need to be monitored, need to be controlled to ensure they don't happen. We heard a story of some individual that, was working at one organization and managed to actually take a good, amount of account information. This was a sales individual going from one place to another. And I think it was maybe 2 or 3 months after the individual had left, all of a sudden, people at this other organization are noticing they're losing clients just left and right. What's happening? They don't know what's going on. And after a little bit, they connected the dots that all these accounts that were leaving were under the individual who had left. They ended up contacting the individual that had left and said, "Hey, are you doing anything, funny, or what's going on here?" And they're like, "Oh, no, I'm just, just started my new thing, doing my own thing. I contacted some people that I knew, and, it is what it is." Um, and then they realized after a little while, they did have somebody come in and do some forensic analysis and realized that this individual had essentially stolen the vast majority of their customer database. And it wasn't just his clientele, it was others as well. So, these things do happen. They are actually in the smaller minority of, data leaks than one might think. Because again, more often than not, it's going to be just the silly things where somebody has a wrong email address or putting in the wrong attachment, or just kind of odd things like that. But yeah, these other malicious actions, they definitely happen, and it's definitely a good idea to have something at least in place to be able to view this before it becomes too serious. And of course, restrict it as well if you can.
Bring it back to Safetica. How are you helping your customers to tackle these challenges we've talked about?
Yeah, I mean, really at the end of the day, first and foremost, visibility. This is the one thing that we hear probably the most from the clients that we work with. And when they first kind of get going with the product, I mean, generally speaking, we do a, proof of value with the clients where we will run the product in their environment, in a live environment, for about 30 days or so. And during that time, we'll go through a number of different stages in terms of just monitoring stages, maybe having it set up for some notifications for certain individuals to kind of, let them know that, hey, this isn't exactly correct or whatever it might be. But really, the visibility is key. The having that information on what data is being shared where, what individuals are doing what, again, in terms of, how utilizing that data, the applications that folks are, utilizing, the web sites that people again are working with or working on, and just anything in around really how people are using their laptops or desktops at work is immensely helpful for organizations to get a proper grasp of what really is going on in their organization. Yeah, I mean, really the visibility is the one thing that we hear about from the vast majority, again, that this is what is so helpful. Of course, the blocking aspect of side of things is, again, a very helpful thing as well, but just the pure visibility, I find, is what people are, really the happiest about. But the way that we are doing this is we do have an agent-based solution that is going to be deployed onto machines where, again, we're picking up all this data, and then we have the ability also to, over time, understand what is normal versus abnormal in terms of the data usage, the application usage, web usage, external device usage, and all these sort of things to really start uncovering what is going on in the environment. And then from that point, using either our predefined classifications or our AI-powered data classifications, to then again find that data or label it in one which way or another. And then, of course, putting some sort of restrictions on it if they so wish, to either notify the users that they're, doing something that's not exactly correct, to maybe block the actions, again, depending on, what that data is and where it's going. It really depends. It's very customizable for every different organization that we work with. And speaking of also kind of this, the visibility of things, and going back to that topic, we recently were working with a relatively large healthcare organization, and they wanted to implement the product in a somewhat slow sense, just because, again, they're healthcare. They want to make sure they're not going to break anything and just roll things out nice and slow, nice and easy to just double check, triple check every step of the way. And we were about, I want to say, maybe like a month and a half or 2 months into this implementation. And they had actually realized and actually come across the fact that it was either nurses or doctors, I can't recall which exactly, but were taking PII data and putting it into public AI tools to help them summarize the data, which, again, that can be a somewhat innocent thing to do, seemingly. It's like, oh, hey, I just wanted help with, I don't know, summarizing my data. I didn't want to have to go through all this information. I wanted to make it nice and concise. So I gave it to AI. What's the problem with that? Well, depends on what you're giving it, but still, if you're giving it patient information, that's not okay. And again, the organization had finally had the visibility of these sort of things and had to make some drastic changes with some of these individuals because, again, it's not exactly a thing that you want occurring. And again, just having the visibility is key. If you have that, then you can start to control it. But without the visibility, you don't have anything.
So for a security team that feels like they have DLP covered, what questions do they really need to be asking?
Well, I think what they need to be asking is more so they need to put themselves into the mind of the user, to really think about, okay, so, or, rather go even talk to the users, do a little day in the life, have maybe a half-hour meeting with somebody and say, how do you generally do this, that, or the other? Because, again, the IT individuals, again, depending on the sort of visibility they have into the actions as it currently stands, maybe they do have enough relevant information, maybe they don't. But an IT individual will work in a very, very different way than a marketing individual, which will work in a very different way than a sales individual, and so on and so forth. So you really need to put yourself in the, mind of that person or their shoes or whatever you want to say, really. But this is, I think, a very important piece because a lot of people do get kind of stuck on what they think maybe are going to be the ways that people are going to, I don't know, exfiltrate information or do something with data, where it might be in a completely, different side of things on how people are actually doing something. And it's really just looking into what could possibly happen in the environment, which that's a never-ending list of things realistically. But just that's really the best thing I can do, or rather one can do, is get the visibility if you can first and foremost. Otherwise, you're going to have to, go through and talk with the folks in the environment to understand how do you actually work with the data that you have access to. But again, this is why it's so important to have a tool like Safetica, so you don't have to go to all these people in the environment and talk with them and figure out how do you do this, how do you do that. You can just see the data within the console and then go from there, which makes everybody's lives a lot easier.
John, we've covered a lot here in a short period of time. Where can our viewers go to learn even more?
Yeah, so you can find us on safetica.com. Lots of good information there. You can reach out directly to us to speak with us if you wish. You can also find our partners that we also work with on the site as well if you prefer to work with partners. But either way, there's a lot of good information on our website, a lot of case studies or other information that you can read or download. Additionally, if you want to see what folks are saying about us and not just take my word for it or whatever we have listed on the internet, or rather website, you can go to, for example, Gartner Peer Insights. They've got a lot of good information up there from real world users of our product. Also, I believe there's SourceForge. You can find information on Safetica there as well, and G2 reviews. I would say for the real world information on kind of what people really think of the product, these are going to be probably some of the best places to go to get that information to help you make an informed decision if you're looking for something like a data loss prevention tool or insider risk monitoring and management tool, and just to gain that sort of visibility. But yeah, that's probably the best places to find information on Safetica.
John, a terrific conversation. Thank you so much for sharing your insight today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank our attendees as well. You took time out of your day to be here. We respect that. We appreciate it. And trust you're walking with some excellent new insight, and you can put to work immediately. As always, I look forward to seeing you at one of our upcoming events. And until then, for ISMG, I'm Tom Field. Thank you for giving us your time and attention today.